Hello, I'm Rodney Jones, and I'm with the Agricultural Economics Department at Oklahoma State University. And in this segment of the Farm Transition Workbook video series, we're going to talk about what matters most. What is the most important thing for you and your family to be considering as you are contemplating a farm transition or any other family business transition for that matter. We're going to talk about what's at the real core of our inner being, our most deeply held values, our value system, if you will, what forms our character, what determines who we are, and we're going to put that into the context of how we need to think about those issues as we're considering a family business transition. Each of us has some deeply held core values, core beliefs, a value system, and those values were developed throughout our entire life, probably most influenced by our family, our upbringing, perhaps the government to some extent, various forms of media, books and other information that we've read throughout our lives. Another very important contributor to our value system is our religious beliefs. Other materials that we've been exposed to, experiences in life, depending on our age, depending on what we've done, where we've been. All of those things influence our value system as well as our overall education, where we went to school, who we were exposed to, who were the primary influencers in our lives through our educational process, and our friends. And this list is not all-inclusive, just a few of the key elements that have formed our belief system, our value system. Things such as developing our level of integrity, things such as developing our belief in the importance of honesty. Those are all core values that we all mention and we all say we aspire to. Other things might be important to us in the way we run our lives and the way we run our business. The reason we say that this is what matters most and what is the most important is because our strongly held values are our inner core. They are the foundation upon which we build our lives. Our core values translate directly into our beliefs, our attitudes, and again, ultimately our behaviors, how we run our lives, how we run our businesses. So the core values are the foundation. They're at the foundation of how we behave in society and in our business lives. So in our businesses, our values influence obviously what we produce, how we produce it, how we finance it, how we collaborate with others, how we operate. And over the years, we've developed that for our own business in our own minds, and we've worked on our reputation, our standing in the community, what we're known for as a business. And then all at once we complicate this by throwing into the mix a family business transition, or perhaps the desire to pass this business on to the next generation or somebody else who might be interested in operating that business. And so at family business transition time, we need to not only reflect on our own core values, but to consider how our values mesh with the rest of the family business stakeholder team that we envision being a part of this business over the course of the transition and at the end of the family business transition. Now, we need to step back and just talk about who those stakeholders are, because that could be a lot of different people depending on your individual situation. And you'll probably hear this definition a number of times throughout the course of this transition workshop video series, but we're going to define your business stakeholder team as anyone who has or will have an ownership interest in your business, an operational interest in your business, and here's the biggie, and or an emotional stake in your business. So you could have individuals who will be emotionally interested in your business for many years to come who may not be the operators or even the owners of that family business. The point here is that as we go from basing our business decisions and the way we operate our business and the things that we're engaged in on the values of one individual or one set of individuals that has historically operated and owned that business, as we transition from that to a framework where we're passing ownership, operation, management of that business to a different set of stakeholders, we need to make sure that our core values are still in line and still consistent among the entire stakeholder group. So how do we do that? Because values ultimately are going to drive the entire business plan. The business planning process, if you read the strategic business planning literature, or if you happen to take, for example, one of my classes on campus here at Oklahoma State University, we'll talk a lot about the business planning process, about the need to form a foundation based on values that then lead to developing a vision where this business needs to be in the future, which also is important in contributing to what the business is all about now. That would be more of what we would consider to be a mission, and how that then translates to 3 or 5 year objectives, things that we'd like to see happen, but we haven't set a specific timeline for when those things will happen. And then we transition that to very specific and very timed goals, things that we're going to get done, and we've set a timeline for when we're going to get them done, consistent with the objectives and the mission and the overall vision, and certainly consistent with the deeper held values of our organization. And then we develop specific strategies for what we're going to engage in and how we're going to engage in those activities, and tactics for how we're going to get the job done. A lot of folks in the business planning process focus a tremendous amount of attention on the last 2 categories that I'm talking about there, how we're going to get things done and exactly what we're going to do, and probably don't spend enough time on the bigger picture issues, the vision, the mission, the goals, the objectives, and ultimately anchoring that in some deeply held values. So, how do we engage the various stakeholders in our proposed family business transition in this exercise of identifying and meshing our core values? That's a very difficult exercise, and we have a few tools that we reference on the Farm Transitions website that we'll talk about later. It's already been mentioned in some of the other videos if you've watched any of the other videos prior to this. One suggestion is to have each individual stakeholder, and again, remember the broad list that captures, the broad list of folks that could potentially involve, have each individual stakeholder on your stakeholder team engage in what we would call something like a hero exercise. In other words, have them think about people who have influenced them, who they respect and they admire, and jot down characteristics of those individuals. That helps us to zero in on what characteristics are really important to us. Another similar exercise is to have the various stakeholders engage in what we call a what you value most exercise. In other words, just reflect on their own personal accomplishments, on what they consider to be their most proudest, their most proud accomplishment, the accomplishment that they've had in their life that they're the most proud of, and jot down what makes them feel that way about that particular accomplishment. And that helps to zero in on some individual core values, what's really important to the various individuals. Then comes the hard part. And you are going to hear a lot in this transition workshop series about the importance of family business communication. Here's our first shot at it. One of the most important family business communication topics is going to need to be zeroing in on that list of core values that melds the core values of the individual stakeholders that we've been talking about. So we have to go through a communication exercise, and we have videos dedicated to family business communication. This is one of the big ones. We bring that individual exercise, which could be done outside of a joint meeting environment. It could be circulated ahead of time as some kind of an assignment or some kind of a task for the various stakeholders to engage in. And then we need to bring everybody together, and we need to have some discussions. And again, one of the first discussions is, what is really important to this business? And is that the same set of things, the same list that was important to the previous owners, managers, stakeholder team that has been historically in place for that particular business? This is a difficult exercise. Some would recommend that we may need to break that into smaller pieces. Maybe we need to develop a list of smaller piece categories that we can talk about at this particular family business meeting. For example, are there some strong feelings about the ownership and organizational structure that needs to be in place in this future business? And what I'm talking about here is, how important is it to the stakeholder team that this business be strictly owned and managed, or managed by family members? Or are they okay with bringing in some outside, quote unquote, the family stakeholders? That may be a core value that the family just doesn't want to violate. They just don't want outside the family members in an ownership or operational role in the business. Or maybe they're okay with that. How are decisions going to be made? Is it important that we involve off-farm stakeholders in the decision-making process? Or are we okay with the folks who have been charged with operating the farming operation to make various decisions, and at what levels? Stakeholder compensation might be another category that would allow you to break this exercise down into smaller bits and pieces. Fairness versus equality in the estate planning component. How important is it that everything be divided somewhat equally, or is it more important to deviate from that, perhaps to account for some other things that have gone on in the estate planning thought process? Another one would be, what types of products and services is this business willing to produce in the future? Perhaps historically we have been in the registered cow-calf business, for example, or perhaps we've been in the registered seed wheat business. Is it really important? Is that a family legacy that we need to preserve? Is that a core value of this family business? Or would we be allowed to deviate from that model at some time in the future if some other opportunities arose that looked like they might have some financial benefits and give up some of those historical lines of business? Those are just some examples. During this communication process, come up with your own smaller piece categories, and we have some tools and some worksheets available in the workbook series on the website to help in that process. Here's the tricky part. The tricky part in this core values exercise as we contemplate a family business transition is getting from I or me to the new set of business stakeholders. The I or me core values, for example, what's important to me? What would I like to be? Who am I? What do I want to be? How will I measure business activity? What's my plan for the future? How am I going to implement strategies and tactics? That's the way we've been looking at this business historically. If I'm, for example, the exiting generation, and transitioning that to a we mentality or a future mentality, or perhaps multiple stakeholders that will be involved in this business in the future. What's important to our business rather than what's important to my business? What would we like to be? Who are we now? What do we want to do in the future? How are we going to measure these activities? What's our plan for the future, and how do we implement those strategies and make this business move forward? So moving from the I mentality, the exiting generation core values, and all of the associated things that we've talked about, to the next generation, or the next group of business operators and owners, is the tricky part. So, are we up to the challenge? I think we probably are, but we have a difficult task ahead of us. More information is available, of course, on the agecon.okstate.edu/farm-transitions website. I'm Rodney Jones, and thank you for your time watching this video on the most important component of the farm transition planning process.